Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome to our next episode, Making the Shift. We actually have another guest we're super excited about. We've been trying to increasingly have guests on the show, and I don't know. It's just this is an exciting one. No offense to any other previous guests we've had. We've been excited about them as well. But today we'll be talking with Dr. Ross Greene about kind of making the shift and how that looks in schools. Pretty excited about that. Katie, if people don't know who Dr. Greene is, what would you say about him? Then
I don't even know.
Dr. Greene, you're going to just correct her in any way you need to.
I don't even know who they are if they don't know who Dr. Ross Greene is, right? No. I think Dr. Ross Greene really needs no introduction.
I like how, sorry, I'm interrupting you immediately. Yeah. I like how you feel like you have to say Dr. Ross Greene every single time instead of just shorthanding it to Dr. Greene.
I know.
That's one of my favorite things.
Yeah. There you go.
Ross is even better.
Oh, there you go.
Well, we'll do whatever you say.
Yeah. Beyond a well-known author, practitioner, and advocate, Dr. Greene is iconic in the trauma-informed community. He is best known for not just the why behind the work, but really has focused on the now what. His work has largely influenced the work we do in our school with his collaborative proactive solutions model and development of the ASOP, which supports our trauma-informed FBAs. His work has created a lens shift movement by looking at behavior not as a want-to, but a response to unsolved problems, lacking skills, and neuroscience-based responses. My own journey into trauma-informed care was not as an educator, but as a parent who hung on to every word of your Explosive Child book, which totally made sense to me. Dr. Greene, you have humanized our work, provided endless amounts of resources and research for educators for absolutely free and parents. So welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Yeah, this is great.
For coming. Well, we'll jump right in. Not long ago, we were talking with another guest, Guy Stevens, about kind of the bigger picture overall and how our students right now that we have in schools are going to be the decision makers in society. They're going to obviously grow up to be the adults. It's not a new concept. They're going to end up being the people that are making the decisions for the future, right? What skills, if you had to say, like, what skills you see us missing as like an adult society right now that we could be focusing on helping our students learn to maybe correct? That's a huge question. I know it's a huge question, but what are your thoughts on that? What are some of the skills you feel like we're maybe missing right now that we should be focusing in on our kids?
Well, we're not very good at listening to each other right now. So listening, and of course, I think of listening as the purest form of empathy. So that's on the list as well. We don't seem to be solving problems very well these days. We are stuck in our trenches. And we, to get out of your trench, you've got to listen, hear what the other people are saying, and try to work toward solutions that are mutually satisfactory. In terms of prepping the next generation to do it better than we're doing it, I'd say those are pretty high on the list.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important. So obviously we have a high educator listening population. Yeah. I think what's important is, for what you just said, things you didn't say. Man, math. We got to hit math harder.
Yeah.
Right. We got to hit ELA harder. Like we really need to get science down pat. Like, not that those things aren't important. Nobody's saying those things aren't important. But I think it's interesting that the things that maybe are, and I agree with you, things that are maybe big in society right now that we're missing are things that aren't necessarily core subjects in school, and that teachers aren't necessarily always taught how to teach, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that there's always going to be kids who are good at math, no matter what we do. And there's always going to be kids who are competent in math. Why there is, and we need to teach math, right? We need to teach reading. We need to teach all the things we teach. We get carried away and lose sight of the fact that educators have always been among the most important socialization agents in our society. The initiatives that have come down the pike, a lot of them have been high-stakes testing. Zero tolerance policies were popular for a while. Some people are advocating for them again. now that post-COVID, we have a lot more kids with behavioral challenges. Of course, the research is in on zero tolerance policies. They made things worse. And hitting it hard on high stakes testing is not going to cover or teach or give kids practice at problem solving and listening and empathy and resolving disagreements without conflict. So, great for us to have standards. Not great that we are so overdoing it that we are making life far less humane for both teachers and kids. And we really need to stop doing that and get back to the many different roles that educators have always played, not just academics.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. Like we train teachers, 40 hours in a reading program but we don't spend any time training teachers to do the most important part that needs to happen before learning can even occur. So really thinking how can we shift professional development and provide time for teachers to solve problems instead of just the schedules are so tight that we're like grinding to get every last minute, where stress response systems are so heightened all day, instead of looking at the depth and quality of instruction and giving time and space for kids to be collaborative together and be able to solve problems and prioritize some of the other stuff. So we agree with you for
Yeah.
sure.
And it's hard. It's hard for teachers, and you referenced that. I'm glad you did reference that because it is hard for teachers too. I think they are stressed out, and I also think districts as a whole, generally speaking, I think people in general. Maybe this is I have no research to back this up. This is purely just me saying it, but I feel like people in general tend to try to train people and solve problems or whatever on things they are confident in doing.
Mhm.
If we're confident in how to teach somebody how to teach kids how to read, then we're going to train people that way because I'm confident that I can do it. And so I think you get high up in district levels, people don't necessarily know what to do to help students with challenging behavior. They don't know how to teach, how to equip their staff to have empathy and to listen better and things like that. And so they just steer clear of it, and you avoid it and pretend like it doesn't it's not a problem. And so then the solution to that is things like the zero tolerance policies. Well, what do we do? Well, if this happens, we just get rid of the kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so a question we get asked a lot, and you kind of touched on it, is this idea. People will say to us, do you think student behavior is getting worse? Like that's a very common question that we get.
Yeah, it's so much worse
Yeah.
post-COVID, or
It's gotten worse. All these
it
things.
wasn't like this when I taught 10 years ago. What has happened?
Yeah, yeah. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, from your perspective.
Well, given all the schools that I and my colleagues work with, we're certainly hearing that there are more kids acting up and that a lot of the behaviors are more extreme. But I also don't blame COVID for that. I think COVID didn't make it better. I tend to think that COVID just laid bare things that weren't in great shape anyhow, right? But I think that kids who have behavioral challenges, the deck is stacked against them in terms of how we do business in schools these days. Traditional discipline is not going to give them the help that they need. The overemphasis on academics is not going to give them the help that they need, especially if we recognize that their concerning behavior is their frustration or stress response. Suspension, and that concerning behavior is being caused by expectations kids are having difficulty meeting, which in the CPS model we call unsolved problems. We call them unsolved problems for a good reason. We think caregivers should be problem solvers rather than behavior modifiers because detentions and suspensions and paddling and restraint and seclusion don't solve any of the problems that are causing a kid's concerning behaviors. Teaching and reteaching replacement behaviors doesn't solve any of the problems that are causing their concerning behaviors. So for me, that's the litmus test in terms of are we really being helpful to these kids? We also have to take into account that these are often the kids who are struggling the most academically. So here now comes the overemphasis on academics, right? We keep throwing at these kids what they're struggling with, And they continue to show us that they're struggling with it through their concerning behavior, right? And there's your recipe. There's your cocktail. I regrettably, I was right, but I predicted during COVID that there was going to be a rush back to normal when COVID subsided. Um, and that is exactly what we've seen. So we shouldn't be surprised that with the rush back to normal in kids who weren't necessarily ready to get back to normal and maybe weren't even ready for normal pre-COVID, but post-COVID were in an even more compromised position, would be exhibiting more behaviors and more extreme behaviors post-COVID. All of that adds up when you recognize that concerning behavior is caused by expectations kids are having difficulty meeting. I just wish everybody knew that, because then a lot of the things we do in schools that we think are helpful to those kids would make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, as you were talking about kids, I think we rushed back to normal and the adults weren't ready.
You got it.
Yeah, so here we have dysregulated adults working with kids that maybe aren't solving problems the best way because they're under an immense amount of stress to catch kids up, and that really have been through some trauma themselves with the school restrictions and all the things that happened during COVID for educators, the remote learning, all of it. They were not ready to come back and go full steam ahead to catch up. And I think we're seeing symptoms of dysregulated adults who don't feel like they've been taken care of.
Totally. We also have 50,000 teaching vacancies for the same reason. And those 50,000 teaching vacancies are the reason there's even more pressure these days on the folks who stayed. I can't think of any profession that we asked more of and in ways that were more unreasonable than educators during the pandemic, in many school systems. And we're seeing it now.
Yeah. And also to be highly criticized through the whole thing, right? Whether right, everybody's got something to say about education. So not even always being fully supported by community members, right, or those kind of things. So that's it's a tough gig right now.
It is. School board meetings became a metaphor for society at large. Um,
Yes.
whether it was about masking or whether it was about who gets to say what's taught in a classroom. All that stuff has been coming to a head in recent years, and that's all continuing to impinge on job satisfaction and job pressures for educators. It's not just the kids.
Yeah, we've seen that kind of play out in our own community, which
Yeah.
has been interesting.
Yeah, it is. Oh, and I think I always said, like, when we got back from COVID stuff, you went from, like, a lot of educators went from, like, you were heroes, like, for this brief stretch of time, like, you're heroes, look at how great they are, and then, like, all of a sudden it was like, you're the worst, like, and you're like, whoa, like, this is a big shift. Yeah. So a big complaint we have. Listen, we're. I don't think you could ask many people in education if they are for problem solving with kids and have them say no. I think initially, like, hey, in a sterile environment, they're going to say, yeah, of course, I'm for problem solving with kids. It's the practice of it and the putting steps in place to actually do it. One of the things that we hear all the time, big complaint, and rightfully so, and we've already kind of touched on it, but this idea that educators, or from educators, is that there's not enough time
Mhm.
in the day for us to sit down and problem solve with kids. I'm not asking you to maybe say, like, how to do that. I mean, you can if you've got some great solution to how to create the time. But why is taking the time to problem solve with students worth it?
Oh, because it saves time. Um,
I say that all the time.
it's a pretty straightforward answer. Yes, you do have to put time into problem solving, but it doesn't that the amount of time you're putting into problem solving doesn't come close to the time you're spending on problems that are still unsolved and all the time we spend dealing with it. Here's the interesting thing, though. Yes, the problem solving process that we talk about, Plan B in the CPS model, we present it as formal. It's 3 steps. And that's really critical for the kids who need it most badly. But problem solving can be incorporated into any academic lesson all day long. So, and without that much effort, it's more of a commitment than it's more of a commitment of your mentality than it is a commitment of time, because the opportunities to solve problems with kids are presented in math, are presented in English, are presented during recess. They're presented all day long. So if this is a problem-solving classroom, and that's something I will be putting materials out and Lives in the Balance during 2024, so that people aren't only thinking of this as a formal process that you have to sit down with a kid and do. I almost became a teacher. I'm still a bit envious of teachers, not envious of the pressures you all work under, um, in admiration of how well you handle those pressures a lot of the time. The reason I'm envious, though, is, in my scenario as a clinician, the problem is solving is formal. Kid shows up at 4 p.m. We learn how to problem solve, and we problem solve together with the family or with whoever, right? I'm envious. Educators have opportunities to solve problems all day long, every day. Um, what a luxury. It's not going to take more time. Unsolved problems take more time, but it doesn't have to be a formal process if we make the commitment to integrate it into our entire school day.
Yeah, we tend to compartmentalize so many things, right? Like whether it's like this is the time we teach math, this is the time we teach social studies. And again, there's a push
Yeah.
academically for sure to not do that, right? Like
Yeah.
in education world, there's a push to be like, hey, how do they cross over? How can we be working on the same kind of project across all of these different academic areas? But then we still tend to think about solving problems as a separate issue
We
that
do.
also only comes up if there's a problem that's so big that I
Right.
can't just brush it aside.
Correct.
That's when all of a sudden I have to solve a problem instead of trying to teach kids, walk kids through, model for kids how you can be a problem solver consistently throughout the day.
Here's the deal. You only need to teach that a few times. Then you're spending the rest of the year practicing it, right?
Yeah.
And then instead of putting out brush fires all year long, which pains me to no end, the I was speaking at a trauma conference on Monday in Dallas, the Attachment
Mm-hmm.
Trauma Network.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was railing against is how we're in crisis mode, and we've got to get out of crisis mode, right? We're late a lot because we're in crisis mode, and we've been teaching people to be in crisis mode, right? We a lot of teaching has gone into a lot of training, and money has gone into teaching people to de-escalate late, teaching people to restrain and seclude kids very late. If we are solving problems the entire school year, the same problems don't keep repeating themselves time after time. That takes an enormous amount of time. And we have kids who know how to problem solve, start doing it with each other, and are very good at solving problems together and know how to do it respectfully. They know how to listen because that's part of the problem solving process. They respect each other's points of view, and they come to solutions that work for everybody. We were talking at the very beginning about what ails our society. We're not very good at solving problems together. We can teach this at the youngest of ages.
Yeah, I was gonna say we don't give kids the credit they deserve, that we think they're capable of doing it, and we're always trying to fix things for them. So I think really, I always try to encourage others that we can, even at a young age, we have to model and teach them, and they are so capable once you give them the skills and tool sets to do that, to move forward, and they'll start doing it for each other. It's really cool to see once it starts happening. You just have to believe that you teach them and they can start doing this on their own.
They take to it very quickly. There's a great video on the Lives in the Balance website in the guided tour of a full class Plan B that was filmed in Victoria, British Columbia. An entire class solving a problem together. All we had to do really is prep them. You want your view to be respected. And we're working towards solving a problem that's going to work for all of you. That means listening, no eye rolling, no snickering, no whispering under your breath. If you want your view to be respected, even by people who disagree with it, you have to be a good listener too. And it's a 20-minute video of a class working toward a solution that worked for everybody. Um, it's beautiful, and it's a really good lesson in democracy. Now, those were sixth graders. You can do this with 3-year-olds.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. And I think so much of this idea of training people and what we've spent time training people on, like, and not that we shouldn't be trained on how to de-escalate or anything like that. I know that's not what you're saying, but if we trained to look ahead of time, I think that makes such a big difference. We say a lot that what's hard about training people in the only word I'm coming up with is behavior. It's not really it, but problem solving, however you want to describe it, like social aspects of school and of life that aren't academic. When we're training people on that, what's hard is for educators have gotten used to sitting down, having somebody say, if you do this, then you do this, then the kid knows how to do this math problem. If you do this and you do this, then this kid knows how to read. And this kind of training that we're talking about is a little different because it's changing, so much of it is changing how the adults see things. And that's hard. It's hard to change how somebody sees something,
Mhm.
and what the kind of things they're looking for and how they interpret what they're taking in from what they're seeing at a kid. That takes a lot. It's a different kind of training because it's not always A plus B equals C, right? It's going to be a lot of variables. But I think if we can start putting in time and effort towards that, we really can start helping people see differently. And I think that's one of the big keys to all this.
I think a big part of that, you're saying something very important here, because some of the training is algorithmic. A lot of the training is algorithmic. Um, if you use this strategy on this academic issue, you will be successful. If that strategy doesn't work, here's another. If that doesn't work, here's 37 other ones that you can pluck, right? But that's very adult driven. And it doesn't frequently include the voice of the kid. And of course, in the CPS model, the person who's best equipped to tell you what's making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation is the kid. So I also find that adults spin their wheels a lot with what we might call strategies, finding the right entry point, making adaptations, making accommodations, when they really actually don't know what's getting in the kid's way in the first place. And that is ridiculously time consuming. So,
Yep.
if we were talking about time, yes, those strategies might work, but sticking with strategies in the absence of the kid's voice and in the absence of the kid's involvement is just extraordinarily time consuming, especially if those strategies that we're using aren't working. So, my mantra is, you know what? First of all, always value the voice of the kid. That they are your number one source of information on what's making it hard for them to meet an expectation. But if you want to use a strategy as a first stab at something and it works, great. If it doesn't work, don't keep strategizing. Don't keep looking for the right entry point. Also big these days is making sure that kids are having grade level content, whether they can handle it or not, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't want to deprive anybody of educational opportunities. Well, here's what I know. If you put expectations on kids that they can't meet because you are so desperate to keep kids at grade level, and because you don't want to deprive kids of educational opportunities, they're going to walk out of your classroom, they're going to be in the hallway, they're going to be running out of the school, and that's what I would call depriving kids of educational opportunities by placing expectations on them that they can't meet. So it's a fascinating world out there these days. I get it all. We don't want to deprive anybody of educational opportunities. Have we gone overboard as it relates to not meeting kids where they're at? I think in many instances we have.
Yeah, we tend to swing too far. I think probably in society in general, but we tend to swing too far in education. I know, and I've been around long enough now to actually see it. Forever, I heard people talk about it, but we don't do a good job of staying like in the middle. Like we do, we are way too better at like being a pendulum that swings way to one side, then we're like way to the other side, then we're way to the other side. And at some point, you would think we would stop doing that, but apparently not yet. So,
Um, Fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
hopefully our goal is to get it in the middle somewhere,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Okay, so in the trainings that we've gone to of yours, and I think you would say this as well. There's nobody's saying that there's not going to be challenges when we're trying to solve problems with kids, right? Like there will be, but what would you say are some of the common challenges of solving problems with kids?
Um, this is mostly a training issue. People who are new at it are likely to run into more problems because they're new at it. It's a new skill,
Yeah.
right? Um, it is not easy for adults who are accustomed to being the ones who feel like they have to figure out what's getting in the kid's way, and they are the ones who have to come up with a solution to move on to a rather different process, right? That's a hard part. And then there's just technicalities and nuances of each of the three steps that are involved in solving a problem collaboratively that can be a little difficult for people who are newbies. The first step, the empathy step, is where we're gathering information from the kid. One of the most common mistake newbies make is they leave the empathy step too early. They hear one thing from the kid and they move on to the next step. Nope. We're sticking in the empathy step until we exhaust everything that could be making it hard for this kid to be meeting this expectation. The define adult concern step is where the adult is entering their concern into consideration. Not uncommon for adults not to have the slightest idea what their concerns are. So that's a
Hmm.
hard step. And then the invitation is where we're coming up with a solution that's realistic and mutually satisfactory. Oof. Us adults often come up with solutions that we already know the kid can't do, but we're so strongly influenced by what we want the kid to do that we roll with a solution we already know the kid can't do. That's not going to work. And we are not necessarily accustomed to coming up with solutions that address the concerns of both parties, which is what mutually satisfactory means, because we aren't even accustomed to figuring out what the concerns of both parties are in the first place. So, this is new for people. Educators, I'll say this about educators, because they work with kids, like all of us who work with kids, you give them something new, like all of us who work with kids, they think they should be good at it immediately because they work with
Yes.
kids. So we got to give ourselves a little grace here, give ourselves a little time to get good at it because you're not going to be good at it in the first go. But if you give yourself time to get good at it, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, and I think like you said, anything takes practice. One of the things I'll brag on you and your system here for a couple minutes because I've in the just my history of my career, I guess, have done a ton. I've logged more time than what one would expect if I just say I'm a teacher because of what I specifically do. I've spent a ton of time listening to kids' problems, what their real problem was, and trying to find ways to come up with solutions, right? And I did it by watching people and learning from people's mistakes. And I did it from trying things myself and making a lot of mistakes and thinking I was doing it right, and then finding out I was really making more of an issue than I was, and grew, and eventually, just in the last handful of years, actually went to your training. And when I was sitting there listening to it, one of the things I wrote down in my notebook that nobody else could read because my handwriting's so bad.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wrote down in my notebook was this is because people would ask me, not that I'm like so great. This is going to come off weird maybe for me now that I'm
Yeah.
starting the story.
Yeah.
But people would say like, well, how are you, like, how do you get this kid to work for you? Or how is this kid doing, what, yeah, or why do they act different with you than they do somebody else? And I never really had a good way of telling them what I do because it had all kind of been just hodgepodge what I had learned. And as I sat there in your training, I thought to myself, and remember writing it down. I said, this is it. This is the thing. and I didn't have words for it like you've had words for it, and I didn't have a system for it like you've put a system to it, and and I didn't have a way to make it accessible to people. And I'm not saying I was doing exactly what you were doing, but I started realizing, man, there are some tweaks I could make based off of what I learned from you to make myself better. And there's a person I can point to and a system I can point to for people that could help them do the very thing they're asking to be better at doing, that I've never been able to tell them. And so I just want to say like that's it really is a great training to go to. It's a great just system, I guess, if you want to call it that, to be able to help solve problems. And so if you're out there and you're listening and you're thinking like, what is all of this? I haven't necessarily, maybe they've read some of your stuff, maybe they've heard you in some clips or something, but they've never actually gone to their training. I would strongly encourage
Yeah.
it because it actually puts a system in place that I think a lot of people are missing.
Yeah, I think my takeaway for people today is really looking at Dr. Ross Greene's CPS model as a school administrator. As we say, okay, we talk a lot about the why problems. We're talking about how to, but really putting systems in place. Look at the collaborative, proactive solutions as part of your tiered intervention system. We have realigned our disciplinary practices there, so there's tiered interventions, and the CPS model, right? That is an easy thing to put in your tiered intervention model to support your students in your school. It should be a tiered intervention. It can be done at tier 1 level, like you talked about. It can be a tier 2 intervention. And we've even embedded it into trauma-informed FBAs in our school for more intensive intervention system. So I think that's a shift. A district will start looking at your model and say, how does this fit into an MTSS aligned process? You've put into words what needs to be happening. So it's a great system.
Thank you.
A question we tend to ask people as we wrap up here is what if, and I think those were kind of our answers ultimately, but what would you want people to walk away from this episode knowing or taking away? I know there's a lot we've talked about, but what's something you would want people to take away?
Well, you said one of the things, and that is that the CPS model can be implemented within multi-tiered systems of support. This is not a foreign country here. How well it fits with PBIS is a slightly different story because of the B word of PBIS. We're not saying throw PBIS out with the baby and the bathwater. We are saying that the more CPS you do, the less teaching and reteaching replacement behavior you're going to be doing. If you're going to be checking in and checking out, it's going to be about problems, not a kid's behavior. But I think of this, I guess the most important thing for schools is this is as important for the educators as it is for the kid. I was telling somebody that, a parent is as happy as their least happy child, right? But educators take how their kids are doing very much to heart. Educators don't like to see one of their kids struggling. Educators don't like feeling like they're not exactly sure what to do to help a kid who's struggling. That's where this comes in. It's very humane. Educators like to have relationships with their students, right? We're in an era in which we're talking about the importance of relationship building. The problem-solving process builds the relationship for you. The problem-solving process improves communication. All these things that we want. But what I've heard many people who work in schools that say that they're trauma informed tell me is, we've been working on relationships for 2 or 3 years now, and that's good, but we're still not sure what else to do. All right, this is the what else you do, right? So that's what I would say to educators. At the trauma conference on Monday, I put a slide up that had 100 cows on it. And I reminded people that there are 100 cows in every McDonald's hamburger. In that sludge that eventually becomes a hamburger, there's 100 different cows in that one little hamburger. And I said, in some respects, that kind of reminds me of how schools have tried to go about doing things. So I call it the hamburger approach, right? But really what it would call, we would call it, the end result of the hamburger approach is what we would call initiative fatigue. And I was imploring schools to be more selective about what they implement because more is not necessarily better. A lot of the things schools implement with the best of intentions actually contradict each other. But it's this hamburger that we're throwing up against what I view as the elephant in the room, switching animals here. We need to retool our school discipline program. It's not working for the kids who access it the most. We need to rethink how we're teaching people. Don't be late. We need to teach people how to be early. And there's a lot of different practices that go along with that. And implementing that takes courage, and it takes wisdom, and it takes a vision, and it takes commitment. It can be done. And the CPS model can be a very big part of making that happen. That's what I'd want to leave people with.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Dr. Greene, we want to just thank you so much for coming
Yeah.
on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Hopefully, if you're out there listening, pass this one on. This is a very worthwhile episode for people to listen to. Check out all of Dr. Greene's work.
Yeah, go to Lives in the Balance, right, Dr. Greene, if they want to. There is so many free resources out there for school districts that you make so accessible, and great opportunities for pre-recorded trainings and all kinds of things on there. That's a great way to start accessing some of this and looking, like you said, through the MTSS lens and how we can do intervention services better to help support some of behavior.
There you go. And by the way, thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Well, let's go out there, folks. Figure out how to solve problems with kids.
Yeah.
Empathy, listen. All those things are great. Let's go out there and do the work.
Let's do it. Thanks, Dr. Greene.
Take care.
Hey, everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.